Okay, I'm super excited for this conversation. Hello, this is Jeff Harry with Rediscover Your Play. I help people tap back into their inner child, as I believe your inner child has all the answers that you need. And today I have the amazing Kim Perkins. Kim, can you introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm so happy to be here with you, Jeff. There's so much to talk about. I'm an organizational psychologist. I studied positive psychology at Claremont Graduate University with Mike Csikszentmihalyi, the father of flow. And I work with organizations and individuals on both social, to help a better understanding of social issues and also just to help their overall performance and creativity.
Oh, so many questions. The fact that you
So many
are
questions.
Dr. of Flow. Ooh. So then wait, why don't we first dive in just to the idea of like, how do you define flow and how do you incorporate it into your work and life?
Oh, what a great question. Flow, okay, so to back up a little bit about positive psychology is the study of like what makes life good. So we know all kinds of things about dysfunction. And, Freud said the purpose of psychology as a practice was to help get people up to a normal level of suffering, right? So positive psychology came in the middle of that and said, well, what's really good? What are peak experiences? And so Mike Csikszentmihalyi came up with this idea about flow, which was a way of describing peak experiences. And in flow, when you're in flow, people know it as being in the zone. I mean, I'm sure you've been in the zone with an activity a lot of the time. And when that happens, we kind of lose ourselves in it. We aren't feeling self-conscious. They call it action awareness merging, when you're so involved in an activity that it feels like you just think a thing and you're doing it, like when you're playing video games, or people get this with sports or music production. And so that's one of the hallmarks of this thing that you think of as a peak experience, where you are having a wonderful time and you're not thinking about time at all. Maybe time speeds up or slows down or just stands still, and you're completely engaged in what you're doing. And that's the flow experience.
And then what about, how do you incorporate it into your own work and your life?
One of the things that I found in working with tech companies in particular is that they really need a lot, they like and need a lot of flow in what they're doing, because partly some of the very engaging, involving work of making the tools that we use is about, well, coding, for example, and it's something that's extremely immersive. And by thinking about principles it's really easy to get people out of flow so that they're not in this state, but you can't make people get into it. And so when I work with organizations, a lot of times what we're doing is we're trying to remove the barriers for people getting into this flow spot, because when you're in a state of peak experience, you're also pushing the boundaries, you're inventing stuff, you're being creative, you're starting to do more than you could do before. And we want that. Obviously, we want that when we're creating things, when we're making art, even in our interactions. Like I'm assuming you and I are going to get into some flow today as we talk about these awesome things. So how do you get rid of the barriers that make people feel self-conscious? How do you get clear Wednesday afternoons with no meetings so that people can go straight into their projects and stay there? How do you get rid of some of the barriers and things that take you out of flow?
That's so interesting, because I always thought like someone goes into flow and you're helping them go into it. But what you're just saying is like, oh, it'll naturally happen if you simply remove all of the blocks that are getting in your way. Because, when I think of, my work and play, first off, it's just like I'm not thinking of the past and I'm not thinking of the future. I'm just like, I'm going to do this thing. I have no idea where it's going to go. I partly love the fact that I have no idea where it's going to go. And then I know that I'm doing right by it, because then I forget about time. And then what's weird is I'm creating stuff, then I attract other people that are like, hey, you should flow with me here. And I'm like what we did, like we connected randomly, on the club. And then we were like, oh, this is really fun. We should continue to do this. And I kind of feel like that's how people travel. That's that travel-oriented, play-oriented, growth-oriented mindset, where you're just willing to say yes and all the time, to things that are completely dangerous. You probably shouldn't say yes and, but you still do it. And then you end up like on an island at some party and, you know, you're doing things you've never done.
Yes.
And you're like, how is this possible? Flow, my friend, flow.
I agree. It makes things go better than you could possibly have expected or planned for.
Okay.
When you're in the state. Yeah.
So then you know, tying to then positive psychology and like the idea of like what's happening right now is like, how do you, well, here, let me provide context. I brought up positive psychology in a meeting recently, and someone was just like, oh, you know, I think positive psychology is wrong. And I was like, what do you mean it's wrong? She's like, because it's just telling you to be positive all the time. So first, can you respond to that? Because I responded to her, but can you respond to that? Because a lot of people think positive psychology is just being happy all the time.
Yeah, you know, people often have that misconception that positive psychology is that Dale Carnegie kind of thing of just think positively or just stay on the bright side or always look on the bright side of life. You know, it's not really, the idea with positive psychology is that you have to, part of enjoying life and therefore all the good things we want is appreciating the good part, but not at the expense of the bad part. It's not saying no to the bad part. It's not saying don't look at that at all. If anything, it's saying go deeper.
Right.
So there's been a lot of people are familiar with the idea of the negative being stronger than the positive in a way, which means that like if you are going out and you've got a presentation to do and there's 50 people in the room and all of them are standing up at the end cheering you on, and then there's one person who's sitting there with their arms crossed, not giving you a standing ovation, where's your mind going to go, right? What is that guy thinking? You're not going to think about those 49 people clapping and cheering for you, right? And so I think of positive psychology, what we can do with these things is more to get a more complete picture of what's going on, because the negative is going to constantly be stealing our attention and our thunder. We're going to keep concentrating on that one guy when there's actually something else happening in the room. So rather than thinking of it as a way of not dealing with problems, I think it's a way of more evening out what's actually happening in front of you so that you can deal with the problems better. And see
right.
And a lot of times, and you know this as a coach, well, a lot of times what you're doing with positive psychology is instead of saying like a mechanic, like you're trying to fix an engine, like something went wrong, like your car doesn't work, right? So if it's an engine, you go look for the problem, fix the problem, and then it'll all work, right? But it doesn't work that way for human beings. You can know what the problem is, and it won't tell you anything about how to fix it.
So then tying positive psychology to like what the reality is happening right now, right?
Yeah.
Like, you know, you have the Black Lives Matters movement. You have the fact that like racism keeps revealing its ugly head, and it's always been around, but now it's even more blatant, more obvious. So how can one use positive psychology, you know, in this historical time, like in this movement, in a healthy way?
That's a wonderful question, and sadly, it's one that people are only beginning to really look into on an academic level, because it's always been kind of, you know, psychology. It's about the individual, but we have to acknowledge the societal things. And what I think is really worthwhile about positive psychology is that it teaches you how to look for the exemplars. You look for somebody doing it right. You look for people and groups and institutions where progress has been made, where things are going well. And you think, how can I prototype that to make something else using the seeds of what worked over there? So it's kind of, I think of it as a synthetic thing rather than an analytical thing. You're not looking for the problem that went wrong, fix that, and then the whole system is thing. You're looking to blueprint the whole system around something that already does work.
So can you give me an example of what that might look like?
Sure. Yeah, so I have a colleague, Meg Warren, who did her dissertation from Claremont in positive psychology on exemplary allyship.
Ooh,
so
sweet.
What does it actually mean to be a good ally to people? And so of course it was an organizational thing. So it was a work-based idea. And what she did was she studied people. She decided on her area. She was going to work with faculty at colleges, and asked them who has been a good ally. Asked women, asked people of color, asked who's been a good ally to you. That is another faculty member, and then they would say, well, this person has been pretty good in for whatever ways. Find out what it was that they did, and then go talk to them about how and why they did it that way. And in that way say, okay, this is what it looks like when it works, rather than analyzing all the stuff that didn't work to go find the root of the problem.
So what did she find out? As I'm like, a lot of people will want to know.
Many inquiring minds want to know about this one. And so some of the things that she found out was that it wasn't enough to just be sort of not racist or not sexist, but that it actually meant carrying a person who, was of a less privileged group into, really supporting them in an endeavor with the more privileged groups. So because all that sponsoring, basically saying, it can be as simple as doing like in a meeting when somebody gets talked over, saying, no, as Jeff said, blah, 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 so that they get the credit and everybody knows this is Jeff's idea.
Mm-hmm.
Or it could be as complicated as making sure that the person is in the room, making sure that when maybe somebody doesn't have too many low level things that they have to do, that they're not able to get to the high level stuff that is where you get what you get promoted on. And again, I'm talking about work here.
Yeah.
But if you see somebody who's always tasked with taking notes, making sure that they get a chance to do some things other than take notes.
Actually, that is a really good point. Yeah, because then you could even see it in movement work where you're like, why is someone doing this task that I can do myself as an ally, while they start thinking strategically on what can be done next. That is, that's
exactly.
Awesome. I love this. I'm so happy we're having this conversation. Okay. So question. What questions do you also have?
The questions. I want to hear a lot more about how you're working with, play and work, for sure. So, when we had a conversation before, you talked a little bit about difficult people. Working with difficult people. Oh, yeah. This is going to get everybody going. All that difficult people in our lives. I'd love to hear a little bit more about your work with difficult people and how you gain, influence with them. Because I think that in these weird times, everybody's got that on their mind.
Yeah, so it's interesting. This just happened like yesterday. So my friend Gary Ware and I were nominated as one of the top 100 HR people, specifically around organizational development, because of our workshop called How to Deal with A-Holes at Work Through Play, or a G-rated version of How to Deal with Toxic People at Work Through Play. And the whole premise of it was like, we got really tired of dealing with a-holes at work, and we want to eradicate them from the workplace. That doesn't mean eradicating a person. It's more making the behavior so uncomfortable in the workplace that it shouldn't exist anymore. Because like for so long, it's been praised in the Steve Jobs, the Rockefellers, the Elon Musks, that you have to be an a-hole in order to get stuff done. And that's just BS, right? That destroys any team when you support the brilliant jerk over the team. The Navy SEALs do it all the time. They do not pick the smartest, most talented, most fit person. They'll pick the team over that person because it's not about that person, right?
Yeah.
So we created this workshop like last year, and then we tested it out in Boston at a marketing conference, and it was hilarious because 100 people showed up and 90 were women and only 10 were dudes. And then we ran it again in Australia right before COVID hit, and again there were 10 dudes at the beginning of the workshop and there were 4 at the end. So you have to first analyze that of what is that? Why do you feel uncomfortable? Do you not there's a lot of things that come into play of privilege, male privilege.
Yeah.
a willingness to like, well, I get to act however I get to act, you know, and my behavior is not checked. So what we do is we do a few different things to deal with difficult people. One of the first ones is the whole ally thing, right?
Yes.
Where in a room where the a-hole is taking up so much space in the room, you work with your colleagues to take that space back over the long period of time. And when I say long period of time, over the next 3 to 6 months to a year of getting each other's back and really vouching for each other, so that it's not all about this person. Because what happens is when you don't stop an a-hole early on, especially, and this is why people need to check kids really early on, you create the Trumps of the world. That's what you do, because they are then allowed to do stuff. They're like, well, I talked to this woman this way, or, you know, I harassed someone in this way and no one said anything, so I'm just going to keep doing whatever I want to do. So you can't give permission from that. And then that's the first stage. And the second stage is like, okay, how do I actually talk to them directly? How do I communicate to them in a way of like, I don't tolerate that behavior. Is that the impact that you want to have? And that's usually how we do it, is we're like, hey, when you said this is the impact that it had on someone. Was the impact what you wanted? Oh, isn't what you want? Well, this is how you're coming off. And if you want to get things done, then I recommend, are you open to suggestions on different ways to do it, right? Some people are open to that. And you're like, oh, I didn't realize I was like that. Or I didn't realize I cut that person off. Then that's obviously different, right? But then there are other people that are like, whatever, man, I can do whatever I want. And then at that point, that's when you're going to their boss and the organization at large and being like, is this the type of person that represents your values? And then they have a choice as to whether they want to keep that person or not, or check that person. And then if they choose not to, then you have a choice then of being like, oh, this is not the organization for me anymore.
Yeah.
And that's a big thing to have to address. And then the final part of it, and this is the hardest one, we talked about this earlier, is like, you also have to address the inner a-hole, the inner critic. Because the external outside a-hole, sorry, this is so weird to say it this way, but is he or she only affects you because there's a part of you that believes it. So if you are able to be like, that's not true. No, I'm not a loser. No, I actually get things done. No, I actually am a team player and I work really hard. You know, when you're able to validate those things, then it doesn't really bother you, because then you're just like, oh, you're just a child. You know, I know you're in a grown body as a 55-year-old white man, but right now you look like you're 4 years old. And then you see them scramble. You see that with Trump all the time, where they're like, like bullies. They're like, oh, I can't affect you anymore, because they're looking for a reaction. They're looking for that. They're looking to bully you. And when they can't get that reaction, they go somewhere else. And then if everyone is doing that and setting their boundaries, after a while, they're like, I don't want to be here anymore. I'm not having any effect on anybody. So that is just a kind of synopsis.
I love that. That's so important, because I feel like that's something that comes up in every organization I've ever been a part of. And also, I love that idea of, you know, thinking about where it hits you as the healer, not as the healer, as the hearer, in terms of what is it that they might be pushing on that you might believe.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm really interested in that, because there's times I feel like in a lot of the organizations I've been a part of lately, like post-Trump, people have been really more sensitive to these dynamics and been a lot more like, I have to tolerate this. Do you think this is true? Like, I have to tolerate this on the world stage, but I'm not tolerating this in my life anymore.
Yeah, absolutely. I think and you might have inspired this article from our last conversation, where I believe you said this, and a friend of mine may have also said this as well, of like, someone else's behavior is not a reflection on you. It's a reflection on them, right? So I
Mm-hmm.
think of the Ken and Karens of the world, right?
Yes.
I just wrote an article on the Ken and Karen that had their guns out because I was like,
Yeah.
why? Why? I was like no one cared about you. No one was paying attention to your mansion. Why
This
did you
wasn't about you.
why it's not about you. It's just not about you.
Yeah.
So why did you
Yeah.
feel the need to come out and threaten people and also put yourself in jeopardy?
Yeah.
And I was trying to understand it and it was like, oh, that's why. It's because my take on it was they were so scared because when they reflect back on how they got their wealth, they stole it.
Yes. Yeah.
They're
Yeah.
personal injury lawyers. So they exploited people. So they think that people are going to be just as sinister and evil as they were, and that they thought the worst out of this mob of people when that group of people didn't care about you. They weren't even there. They were going to the mayor's the place. They did not care about you at all. But they were thinking, uh-oh, chickens are coming home to roost because
Yes.
all of the horrible things I've done are now coming back. And the only way I can defend this is through violence. That's what I thought. And I was like,
Yes.
woo, woo.
I have to agree. I think there's a lot of white fragility that we see around this is from that perspective. And I think that there's a lot of political maneuvering in general that is projecting onto other party what you would totally do yourself, but that doesn't mean that that motivation is something that the other person shares. I always say in my work, it's probably one of the hardest things I ever work with people on is to get the idea that people can be motivated by things that are different than the things that motivate you.
I know, right? They're like, can you
It's a shock.
and they say stuff like, can you believe it? And you're like, yeah, I can believe it.
Yeah. Some people, are all about one thing and you're all about something different. And that's legit. You're both people. And that's really hard to get your mind around. And so I think that comes across, tying that back to positive psychology when especially when we're really attracted to the negative to see what threat might be before us. That we think of our worst, they bit about it, and then we project that onto the other person's intent.
Yeah. So then a question comes up for me as, do you as you identify as a person of color, what is it like being a POC person in the positive psychology world?
Oh, what a great question. Oh, what a great question. There have not been a lot of other people of color. And, when I was going through grad school at Claremont, the people of color definitely talked to each other and we definitely hung out, And but because at least in my field, it was a new field and the program I was in wanted very much to kind of stay on the track that they'd already laid out in positive psychology. And they didn't really want you to come off of that and do some of the work that would need to be done by making positive psychology more socially oriented.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of critiques and valid critiques, I think, of positive psychology as a movement is that it's very geared toward upper middle class white people, with a lot of money to spend. There's a lot of ex-lawyers in this field, and and I say that with love because some of them are my friends, but a lot of times they people go for this high status, high money occupation, then they're not happy and they want to go try to fix it, and they're like, I know what we should do. We should do this, and it's all from a very individual perspective, like just do a gratitude journal or just do something else to make yourself happy, and I think a lot of us, the people of color, at least since we're all kind of looking at each other like, really?
Like we're gonna address racial injustice with a gratitude journal? Is that
No. I mean, not that it wouldn't work on some level, but it's not enough to get us there, right? I mean, it's not going to fix the things that we see that need fixing. And So that's something that I think, you know, and again, I cited my colleague Meg Warren, and I think that she has done a lot to, she's really, she has done a lot to change that in some of our little circles there in California, as far as thinking about how um, that building out some of that idea of thinking about social justice in these terms. But it remains to be seen in positive psychology. There's not like a positive psychology of social things. The social psychology field remains very disconnected from the positive field in a big way. And putting those two together is kind of going to be generation 2 positive psychology, I think, because you can't, you know, if you're thinking about what makes a good life, you've got your individual experiences with flow, and you've got, you know, things, the individual level is very built out, and the organizational, institutional level is not quite as built out.
So if you were in charge of negotiating between those, the sociology and the psychology, and bringing that together, how would you go about doing that?
Oh, I'd need about 3 more years to study things, but
What if you asked her a dissertation in 2 minutes? Go.
Sure. But what I would be doing things like what Meg was doing in terms of looking for what is already working. Let's build on that. That's kind of the basic positive psychology principle, which is instead of studying the root of dysfunction, look for the root of function instead. Where is this working? How do we get there? When people have made progress with each other as in groups, out groups through the world, what has happened? What conditions have been met to make that progress possible?
Yeah.
You know, when people come together, this is something that I'm really obsessed with in general, which is when people are coming from very polarized points of view, where it's not just we disagree on a fact, but we disagree on like what facts are and do facts matter?
Oh gosh, I don't even know where to go when that happens.
Right? I mean, it's mind blowing, but this is where we're at with a lot of our discourse. You know, how to start working on that and building those bridges across from those ways of looking at things, which are essentially just different cultures, you know, at root, different ways of doing things, different ways of organizing thoughts that leads to different individual experiences. You know, I'm being academic here, but I think you get what I'm saying.
Yeah.
That's kind of the thinking about what does, you know, if we know that people aren't particularly persuaded by facts, and that people that, you know, are backing, if you put up some resistance, people often back away and entrench more in their beliefs, then to me, positive psychology be studying what overcomes that.
Yeah.
You know, what brings people back together, and not just in a, well, I'm tired of this, so I'll compromise way.
Right.
You know?
It reminds me of like this Dave Chappelle bit where someone was telling him when he was struggling right after he lost his show, or left the show, meaning, and he was just like, yeah, you need to read The Secret. And the guy's like, oh. And Dave was like, okay, let me just read this. And he was like, I can't continue to read this, because he was like, the premise is basically saying that, you know, if you just have a good attitude, everything that you want will come together. And he was like, so are you saying people that are starving in Africa they just have a bad attitude, and if they just thought about mashed potatoes and gravy, then they would be...
Yes, it would magically materialize. And then all would magically
appear. It's like, come on.
I'm try that next time I don't feel like cooking dinner.
Exactly. Let me just imagine these mashed potatoes and gravy. And I think that's the part that I feel is the disconnect when it comes to positive psychology, and how it could have an impact on dealing with racial inequities and addressing a lot of issues around power. But it's right now so rooted in individual flourishing that it's not talking about the community flourishing.
Exactly. I think, yes, I would agree 100%. 100%. And you know, the thing with The Secret, I just want to clarify, that is not, positive psychologists hate that. Hate that. So, right. A lot of people do think that's what positive psychology is, that it is studying like the mechanisms of how The Secret works. And I would say, well, if you have enough privilege, then that might actually work for you in some ways, because then what that does is allow you to get out of your own way.
Yeah, like if you're already
rich, that's your problem.
If you're already rich and you're like, well, I just don't know what to do with my life, you know, it's just like, okay, fine.
But it's pick something. The first thing that comes in is going to be fine. Go with it.
Yeah, just go with it, because you're fine. hierarchy of needs has all been met. You're just in self-actualization area. So you're good.
Exactly. And I'll tell you, but from the very beginning of my career as a psychologist, I thought I might want to do clinical psychology. So I worked on the San Francisco suicide hotline for about 3 years, which was amazing. I highly recommend it for people, any suicide hotline, because it will, you'll learn a lot about how to handle people, and you will feel so much happier when you leave there than when you come in, because you will feel gratitude for what you do have in your life. But I ran into a lot of people who would call the line and they would say, I have a terminal disease. Obviously, because of The Secret, I've brought this on myself, but I can't figure out how I might have possibly done this. So I think I'm just kind of messed up and I should not be here anymore. And I heard that so many times, not necessarily citing The Secret, but that kind of mentality where we're all creating the reality around us. And if mine sucks, it's because I did something bad. I've heard that so many times that I just want to say, anybody listening, that is not true. You did not create this in a way that is damaging to yourself. You can do something else about it. It is not your fault, you know?
Wow.
Yeah.
What else did you learn doing that work?
Oh my goodness. Well, I learned a lot about just handling crises for people and doing it with a light touch, kind of like what you're saying with play. A lot of the time is that coming in with, you know, your heart open, but with a light attitude is the way to help make a difference for people a lot of the time, rather than, you know, coming in seriously and being all professional.
Yeah.
You know?
I feel like I always quote I don't know who said it, but it was like that whole idea of expectations are the thief of joy, you know?
Oh,
and
yes.
It's this, the idea that, like, what I think destroys play for so many people is because they have a specific outcome that must happen. It's kind of like the wedding, the person that like needs the perfect wedding. There's only one way in which the perfect wedding will happen. It has to happen this way. And everything has to work out perfectly, which then destroys all of the possible opportunities and happiness that you could have in all these magical moments if you were just open to all these people coming in that are just expressing their love and want to celebrate with you. But you're ignoring all that because you're like, this perfect way, only this way. And it makes me so sad, because you see kids and they're like, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. Oh man, I just love the world. Deeper, deeper. And then you look at adults and you're like, my life is horrible. And it's just like, wait, why is it so horrible? You know, are you eating every day? Yes. Do you have a roof? Yes. Do you have friends? Yes. Do you have people that love you? Yes. Well, what's wrong? Well, I wanted to watch this show, but it's getting pushed back because of COVID. And you're like, what is happening? Like, of what's important nowadays is so warped that Game of Thrones ended badly.
Oh.
Hey, I agree. And also, it's going to be okay. There's actual real problems we should be thinking about. Like defunding the police, but not that.
Exactly. I'm so with you on that.
Oh. Okay, so what other
But it's true. Well, but thinking about that, when we're talking about social justice issues, I've been seeing a lot of hashtag Black Joy lately, and I really love that as a positive psychologist, right? Because the idea being not just to, associate Blackness with like struggle and problems, but to really for yourself in your life be going after and fomenting joy in whatever way you find it, all the serendipitous, non-planned ways that you were just talking about. And to really support that, which is like part of the essence of phenomenologically speaking, that's what a person's life consists of, those moments.
Yes. Oh, you know what's so awesome about the Black? I had to look this up. So it was Alicia Greenwell and Amber Lester out of Oakland who created the Black Joy Parade just like 3 years ago. And I remember when it was just in their inception, and I was like, well, why do you want to do it? And their mission, as I'm reading on their website, is The Black Joy Parade exists to provide the Black community and allies a live experience to celebrate our influences on cultures past, present, and future. And it's just this idea of just celebrating. I find that even in the background is, my family, I'm half Caribbean and half Filipino. And in the Filipino culture, we have so many parties. So we have parties that are like, I remember I was in the rural area of Zambales in the Philippines, and they were having like this debutante ball for all these people that were over the age of like 70. And I was like, what? Like they were having a beauty pageant, which, don't get me wrong, I'm sure there was a lot of politics and a lot of catfighting involved, but it's like they're celebrating each other. And I was like, at a party. Yes. More of this, please. More of this.
Exactly.
Why are we not doing more of this?
So, I agree.
Sorry, I'm asking so many questions. If you have questions, please throw them at me.
I love it. No, we're talking about all the things. It's fun.
But a question that comes up to me is then, how do we bring more joy to movement work?
That is a great question, because people working on social justice and people working in NGOs also are just so particularly personally bound to burnout. And part of that, okay, I'm just going to say, part of that is like capitalist system. We say, well, if you're enjoying your work and it's meaningful, then we get to pay you less. Because that seems something's wrong.
And there's a story about suffering. What is that? That like martyrdom where you're like,
yeah,
I'm a nonprofit, I have to be paid very little. I see that so much in the Bay Area where we just tolerate less because we think that's part of the story.
Exactly.
Like, how can I be compensated at a compensatory rate and also do the work that is most important to me?
Exactly. And that is not inherent in the system. People say that as though it is a necessary bound of the system. And I have yet to see anything that tells me that that is a requirement. Right? So anyway, but with that in mind, I think that we people have something that they get into like compassion overload, right? I think there's a more technical term for it, but I can't think of it right now. But the point being is that you're trying to be, and it's not like these places don't, when you're doing a social justice movement, it's not like it doesn't have its own politics and its own internal strife that you have to find a way to be chill about, and get what you want at the same time. So it's taxing work. It's really taxing work.
So how would you, if someone was just like, yes, I have compassion overload, what would you suggest they do? Because like, I want to feel all the things. I want to be empathetic. I want to, like when I'm doing movement work and we are sitting silent for 8 minutes and 46 seconds, like I want to feel all of that. How do I do that and also take care of myself?
Well, I think that is where the bringing in joy comes in specifically, is that it has to be there it's not going to outweigh, but to balance out, that there have to be things that you also, there's nothing that bonds people together like adversity that everybody is fighting in a unified way against. And so the celebrating those milestones, or celebrating really anything, or even just celebrating each other, and look how awesome you are that I get to work with you and I'm so enjoying having you here and just having your brain and presence on this. Those are some of the things we can do for each other that can help even this out, is to give back to each other. And
that's such a good point. I remember when I would do campaign work, and anytime we got someone that was like, vote Obama, we would ring a bell. And the idea of ringing that bell, which is something ridiculous, whatever, it got people to make more phone calls because they're like, I want to ring a bell. I want to do it. And it was something so little, right? But it was so important. I think of my friend Josh Healy. He's this phenomenal filmmaker and activist that's creating an amazing work for a movement generation, and a lot about race and how it deals with social justice, especially when it comes to the environment and how those all mix together. And he brings a lot of humor, in the shows that they create and the work that he does, because he's like, everyone's acting so serious all the time, and it's like, This is so refreshing that you can
Yes.
do serious work and also not be serious all the time.
Yes. Exactly. Exactly. And so rather than trying to depart from an area of human experience, in other words, make things less sad or make things less thing, just to balance it out by bringing in more human area, the other side.
I think that's hard for a lot of people. If there's one thing positive psychology taught me, it was to feel all the feelings. And it was to embrace the both. That like, can I be angry and joyful at the same time? Can I be happy and sad? I didn't realize that until like my father passed away and my whole family, you know, including his brothers who hadn't seen each other in 20, 30 years, were all in the same house together. And we were all feeling happy because we were all there together. And I almost forgot. I was like, oh, this is a funeral. I'm supposed to feel sad. And then you can feel all of it. You can feel sad and confused and happy and grateful and all of these things. You're like, I can't handle all these emotions at the same time. Well, no, it's actually a more like, it's just like Inside Out in Pixar, right? It's just like, feel it all. You should feel it all. It's more complex than that. It's always more complex than that.
Yeah, exactly. And and the more that's kind of like removing those barriers where we can be just experiencing what it is to be here, a human on this planet, right? With each other, that's going to make things go better.
So tying into what is our last questions that we have for each other? As this has gone so fast.
I know, I can't believe how fast this has gone. Oh, let's see. You asked a great question that I'm going to just repeat here. What indelible impact do you want to leave this world using the superpowers that you possess?
Oh, the indelible impact.
Indelible impact.
Yeah. So this reminds me of like, so I had a life-changing experience when I went to Brazil. And I was there for the World Cup, and I'm watching all these games, and it was awesome and amazing. Everyone should go to Brazil. And I kept hearing, you know, when you're in that travel mindset, you keep hearing people say something to you, and you're like, after a while, you're like, is that a pattern that's happening, or am I just keep hearing it? And I kept hearing people say, you need to go to Iguazu Falls. You need to go to Iguazu Falls. You got to check out Iguazu Falls. And I'm like, what is this that everyone's talking so much about? And apparently it's these waterfalls that connect 3 countries together: Argentina, Uruguay, and Brazil. They're that huge that you can go and see it from the Argentine side or the Brazilian side. So I'm like, fine, I'll go. It took a whole day to get there, another day to go and see it, whatever. And I remember going, and there was this moment when I'm like walking onto like, they have like a pier where like the water is coming down. And you're just looking at it and you're like, I am so small in this world. I am so tiny. Like this waterfall has been here for eons, who knows, 80,000 years, so much longer. Who knows how long this has been here. I'm going to be on this planet for maybe 80 to 110 years tops, right? Hoping to hit 100. But like, but what do I want to do in the time that I'm here? And I felt like I made a decision at that point. I was like, I don't know exactly what I want to do, but I will make bold decisions and not regret them. It's just like make bold decisions with bravery, right? To just show up fully. And that's kind of like what I think I ultimately want to leave is like, I want to play full out so that at the end of my life, like my tank is empty, right? And then because I'm playing full out, I inspire others to then embrace their whole nerdy selves and play full out too. Because I believe that, I think it's Ellison quote of like, don't ask what the world needs, ask what makes you come alive, because what the world needs is for more people to come alive. Well, how do you inspire other people to come alive? Be alive, like show up, be fully present, put away your phone, be bored sometimes, you know, sit with yourself, even though the thoughts are super weird, you know. I totally binge watch Netflix, but also I want to create, because I realize every time I create, whether it's something angry or whether it's something joyful or whether it's something humorous, it inspires others then to be like, well, I want to do something. I want to create something. And that's ultimately what the impact I want to live and leave.
Nice. I love it.
That's and amazing. Then what about for you then? Because that's a great
turnabout, fair play. You know, I've been on a journey of uncovering for most of my life. You know, I started off as a teenager, I was kind of a journalist person, and I was a, history major, and then I went into journalism, and I was always interested in getting the bigger picture and the deeper truth of things. And I always feel like when there's two things that are at odds, and that means that there's a third way, and it's not a third way between, but it's like a third way under, you know? And that if you can get a little bit deeper into it and see what's really going on, then it solves a lot of conflicts, but also you just get a bigger picture that allows you to be close and stay connected with all of those things, you know? So I think for me, I want to have an impact to help people get deeper into the truth of things, however that might be.
Oh, them. Dude, I'm part of that. I agree.
Yeah.
The idea of lifting the veil, lifting the
veil
of BS so they can really see what's in there.
Yes. And I think, since we're doing quotes, one of my favorites, actually from Gloria Steinem, she said, "The truth will set you free, but first it will piss you off."
Oh, that is so real. Gilbert. Yes, Gilbert always says, I only see people go through a personal transformation when they get tired of their own bullshit. So
exactly.
The same thing of like, you get angry, you either get angry at yourself or others because you're like, I can't believe this is where we're at. But
yeah, exactly.
What do you want to do with it?
Exactly.
Okay, so before we wrap up, please tell us how people can find out more about you and what are you creating right now?
Oh, right. Well, I have a website, kimperkins.com. I am on LinkedIn or wherever. Please find me there. I'm on Twitter at Imperative Form. And I'm really excited about this new project I'm starting with Linnea Sims, who, like you, Jeff, is also interested in play and has a company called Interplay Outer Work. We're working on both interior issues and also on social justice issues. And so we are, I'm starting out the section where we're going to work with organizations to help join a community for people who want to go a little bit deeper into understanding the social issues so that they can not reproduce them and be more anti-racist rather than perpetuating some of the things that have come to light that have been going on.
Ooh,
I know, right?
So if people want information about that, they got to go to kimperkins.com.
Go to kimperkins.com. Yes.
KIMPERKINS.com. Thanks so much for watching, everyone. This is Jeff Harry, Rediscover Your Play, and we will talk to you later.